went to a YangGang rally here in Atlanta during the presidential campaign. One of the presidential debates was here. It's at Tyler Perry Studios, and man, is that place an icebox. I don't know if anyone's ever been in there. Literally, it was like Amy Klobuchar and other people were like jogging in place, trying to like stay warm behind the thing. Then after that debate, we had an event here in Atlanta. It was at a beer garden. It was delightful. 400 people came. And there were so many events here in Atlanta where it just got bigger and bigger. And then the presidential campaign ended up giving way to the Senate races. How many of you were involved with the Senate races here in Georgia that ended up tipping everything? Yeah, that was beautiful too. Evelyn signed off on our moving here to Georgia for a number of weeks. I knocked on doors with Martin Luther King III, which was a delight. And if Andrew Yang and Martin Luther King III walk down the street, you know who everyone wants to talk to? Martin Luther King III. It's a lot of that. It was like, hey, I played with your sister, like all of this kind of personal connection, and then they'd be like, oh, hey, Andrew, when did this go back and forth? It was good times. Every once in a while, I found someone who was like a huge Yang person, and it's like, oh, good, I pulled my weight today. Well, this place has been really special, and I think you all can kind of feel like this state certainly is playing a pivotal role in the future of the country, and it's gone purple. I feel like Georgia, in many ways, represents the future of what happens here in the United States. How many of you feel that way? Yeah, you kind of feel that way, right? Like, it's going to be a microcosm. I have to say, standing up here on a stage with a microphone and whatnot, you feel a little bit like a stand-up comedian. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like that vibe. And so I actually said to my team on the way up here, I was like, I'm going to try out some new material today. This thing can go off in various directions. That's true. But being here too, my campaign for president was inspired in large part by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose childhood home was here and his son brought me to see. And when I was running for president, I'll tell you this story that kind of speaks to what the experiences were. I was on a panel with a guy named Michael Tubbs, who's the mayor of Stockton, California at the time. Raise your hand if you know who Michael Tubbs is. He's a great, great leader, young man. He went straight back to his hometown to try and lead in a better direction. So we're on a panel together talking about universal basic income relatively early on in my presidential campaign. And I say, hey, we should give everyone $1,000 a month. You know, like things are changing quickly. Then at the end of the panel, Michael Tubbs leans over in my ear and says, Andrew, you can say shit I could never say and get away with. That if a young black mayor were to say, we should give everyone $1,000 a month, they'd all be like, oh, get out of here. You know, but if the magical Asian man comes and says, AI, robots, universal basic income, it's like, oh, let's hear this man out. Some very interesting ideas. And so the early days of the campaign were about trying to take what seemed like a very, very ambitious, esoteric, even utopian idea around universal basic income and bring it to the American mainstream. And so many of you helped me do that, and I'm so grateful. It doesn't happen without the folks who rallied around the presidential campaign. And as I stand here before you today, a poll just came out that said 2/3 of Americans are for universal basic income. How about that?
Yeah!
That was you. That was you. That was us. I was thinking, wow, if that number had been that high back when I was running for president, it'd be a little different. Back then it was 27%. A lot's happened since then. But the genesis of my campaign early on, I've been working in the Midwest and the South as the founder of a nonprofit. And a number of experiences had come to me then that drove me to run for president, which at the time was an incredibly unlikely endeavor. Like, you know, you could call it foolhardy, extreme, like you could throw any number on it, like rash, whatever. Any word you want to throw on is probably accurate. And I say in my book, you know, I'd go to a birthday party for my son and with other dads, and they'd be like, oh, what do you do? And then if you say, like, I'm running for president, you seem like absolutely insane. And so I would try to like avoid the question. I'd be like, oh, you know, I'm in policy, like wrote a book, something like that. But then people would be curious, and they'd ask, and then they'd dig in, and then if I actually say, I'm actually running for president, I'm a presidential candidate, they'd be like, oh, really? And then like you have a 30-minute conversation with them, and at the end of it, they were not like, sign me up. At the end of it, they'd be like, oh, good luck with that. I was like, oh, it's freaking wasted half an hour, like talking about. So like in like a very natural way, you're just trying to avoid the subject. I mean, that's like a very odd time. And as a presidential candidate, I had the whole gamut of experiences where I was the guy standing there being like, I'm running for president. And then Beto, when he was really hot, would come in, and then like all these like people would like surround, and the reporters would all flock to him. And so we joke about it, like we call it being Bigfooted. It's like when another candidate would come and Bigfoot you. It wasn't their fault. I mean, they're just much cooler than you. So there were like 21 presidential candidates during this time, and there was like a hierarchy to us. You know what I mean? It's like the cool one, and like you would do this event in the middle of nowhere, Iowa, New Hampshire, and like none of the cool ones would show up. It would be like me, Tulsi, Eric Swalwell, and like, you know, like Joe Sestak or whatever it was. I mean, I love Joe Sestak, and like, you know, like nothing against it, but we were like not the cool kids. Like they would invite the presidential candidates, and the people at show would be like not the cool kids. And then every once in a while a cool kid would show up, and then everyone would be like, you know, flocking to them, and then you'd be like, oh, like it really is like a very challenging experience. It's like a human, you're there. But then I ended up being on the other end of that a little bit later on, where I would Bigfoot other people. It was so wild. I'd walk into an event, and there'd be another candidate, and I'd walk in, and then all of like people would flock to me, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, like, you know, and I'd actually see the other candidate and being like, don't, like, I felt like rushing over to the other candidate, being like, don't worry, I've been where you have been. So there's this whole run of experiences like that no one ever really thinks about. And I actually, even at the time, wasn't really thinking about them that hard, because during the presidential campaign, I reflected not at all about anything. I was like the most single, I was like a hammerhead shark. So, you know, it's like, I think they're single-minded, right? They have like one thing in their minds. So I said to myself, it's like, I have one mission, and that's to accelerate the end of poverty. One mission. I'm gonna do everything in my power. Every ounce of energy is just gonna go toward that. Just gonna grind it out. And I say, if I do everything right, I think I can make a difference. One of the most popular questions you get from a journalist during this time is, are you serious about winning? This is, like so many other media questions, a trap. Because if you say, no, I am not, then they will immediately say, fuck you, and then, you know, and then the article just becomes like, look at this freaking joker. But if you say, yes, I am serious, then you seem insane, and then it will also go back to, look at this joker. There's like a whole circuit of this. So then my answer was, well, there are multiple versions of victory, there are different ways you can win, like things like that. I would say something that shows like, you know, I'm not out of my mind, but you know, we're serious here. And so this was the kind of thing I would just deal with day in, day out. I had like a freaking like force field around my head. Like whatever happens, I'm just like, accelerate the end of poverty. I had this like a mantra, it's like, I'm going to accelerate the end of poverty. And it felt amazing during times of the campaign, including some of the events here in Atlanta, when we would have hundreds, thousands of people show up to an event aligned around that vision, energized by it. The first time we had a huge rally, we were in traffic to go to this event. It was in California, and we were like, what's with all this traffic? We're gonna be late to our event. And then I saw a Yang sign in one of the other cars, and I was like, holy shit, this is our traffic. Like there were these inflection points. I kept growing on a personal level. I would walk the street and someone would be like, Yang, and it'd be like, hey, and that also blew my mind. And then some people would be like, you're running for president, how could you expect not to be recognized? And I was legitimately like, you know, this was not, this is like not part of the consideration set. My wife started saying we can't take you anywhere, because anytime I went somewhere we would end up with like, you know, just me like taking pictures and whatnot. She'd be like, oh, screw this, we can't go anywhere with you. So that energy culminated in Iowa in January, February of 2020. I am the only candidate in the history of Iowa to have won the Iowa youth straw poll and lose the actual thing. So if you just had young people in Iowa vote, we would have been in good shape. It's like cut that age cutoff. No, too old, can't participate this time. It's for the young ones only. There were all of these numbers in Iowa that were actually very compelling, like where I was like #1 on most likable, #1 on who you would want to have a beer with. There were a couple of things that really worked against me, which were has the right experience and can defeat Donald Trump. Those like the two major things. So during the run-up to Iowa, how many of you all came to Iowa and volunteered and did some work? Nate did, nice job, Nate. Where the hell were the rest of you? Some of us, like me and Nate, were trying to eradicate poverty. What were you doing? Watching TV?
We were watching
New
you.
Hampshire, I'll take it. You were doing work, I'm just kidding. So in Iowa, it felt like, I felt like I was a character in one of those medieval movies on horseback leading a charge, you know what I mean? It's like slow motion, drama, the whole thing. I had like long hair. You were just pumped up. And then when we lost that night, it felt like the horses disappeared. Like you were riding and all of a sudden it's like, oh, where'd the horse go? And then you like hit the ground, you're looking for your helmet. But during that time still, we were forging ahead. We went to New Hampshire. And when the campaign did end, it was the first time I'd really taken a moment to pause in probably 2.5 years, like 30 months. Because up till then I was like hammerhead shark, just ignore it all noise, doesn't matter, the divisions, it's freaking, try and move it along. And so when the campaign ended, I thought to myself, it's like, what journey had I just been on? And what did I learn? And those questions were what I tried to answer in the book that you all have in front of you. Like I came off the campaign trail, I was like, okay, I'm gonna write. And I wish to God I had actually done journaling or done some note-taking or entries. Like when I was running for president, periodically people said to me something like that and I'd be like, I have absolutely zero bandwidth for that, but thank you. But then afterwards I was like, oh, I should really try and unpack what the heck just happened. And so the book you'll see, the first third is just about running for president, the lessons learned from that. But then the deeper questions I started getting into were, why do things feel so stuck in the United States of America? Like, why does it feel like we are not heading in a positive direction? Why does it feel like we're actually getting more and more separated into opposed ideological camps that's going to culminate, unfortunately, in eventual political violence, strife, and ruin? You all don't think, that's not hyperbolic, right? I mean, that's like... So I was trying to figure out why we are heading in this direction. And I came to a conclusion. And this to me is the conclusion I want you to leave here with, is that if everyone acts reasonably according to their incentives, we are doomed. That's like really the big takeaway I figured out. I was like, okay, if everyone does what you'd expect them to do based upon the structure of incentives that we have built up over the last number of years, we're fucked. So what do I mean? Let's say you're a legislator right now representing us in Congress. What's the national approval rate for US Congress right now? How many of us are pumped about it? 15, go ahead and shout another number. 18, it's 28. 28% is the last number I saw, which is actually a little bit higher. It's like gotten a little bit of a surge. They went from like 21 to 28. It's like, So 3 out of 4 of us are not pumped about what's either happening or not happening in Congress right now. What is the re-election rate for individual members of Congress? 92, 94, 96. It was 94, I think it's around 92% right now, but still it's a very, very high success rate. For you sports fans, that's a higher win rate than the Warriors, the Bulls, and their like record-breaking season. It's like that's like the incumbent. The incumbent's like Michael Jordan compared to whoever they're playing against. So why is this gulf so vast? Like 28, pretty low, 92, sky high. Like why is it that individual members have such a great chance to win after they're in? There are a bunch of reasons. One's money in politics. But the other is the way the system is set up, our districts are set up, is that 83% of the districts in our country are either safely blue or safely red. So if you get to the general election, you win. Just about guaranteed. The game is not to try and deliver for 51% of your constituents so you win re-election. The game is to avoid getting primaried by the 10 to 20% of the most extreme voters in your district on one side or the other. If you avoid that primary challenge, you win. So what does this mean for someone who has these incentives? You have to either placate or please the 10 to 20% most ideologically extreme folks in your district. And so a reasonable person who's in this system will actually become less reasonable over time because their job security depends upon them being less reasonable. And not to put too fine a point on it, but the 10 to 20% most extreme voters on either side get kind of weird. I mean, like some of these people, not exactly, you know, they're not here in the room today, let's put it that way. I don't think they're at the City Winery in Atlanta right now. So those are the political incentives, and then they get compounded by media incentives because our cable news networks have now found out that they command better ratings and more loyalty and attention if they cater to a particular ideological audience. And then social media pours gasoline on the whole thing. You know, where the more inflammatory and derogatory and divisive you are, the better you're going to do. So that's the system of incentives as it currently exists, and it's getting stronger and stronger, not weaker and weaker. Does that seem like a reasonable summary? Yeah, that's it. You know, and so if I'm a member of Congress, I actually will be punished if I try and compromise and deliver. And I'll use one example. Senator Marco Rubio a number of years ago proposed like bipartisan immigration reform. What happened? A week later, he was like, I was just kidding. And why? Because people in his own party were like, no, we're gonna get you if you do this. And then he was like, oh, my job security depends upon my not doing this. A Republican senator said to me the other day, we politically benefit more from keeping an issue around than resolving it. If the issue's still around, I blame the other side, I raise money, it's like, hey, you have to help me fight the other side. I resolve it, I lose my job. I come up with a bipartisan compromise package, I lose my job. So those are the incentives. That is why we are so sunk. And what I realized was that we should expect to fail with this system of incentives. Like this is not leading us anywhere positive. It's actually going to lead us to the next civil war. And political stress in this country, polarization are now at literal civil war levels. And so the feeling we have, it's not just in our heads, like it's real. It's almost tangible. So that's the situation as it currently exists. What do you all think that's a pretty accurate description of where we are? Yeah, right? You're like, yeah, that makes sense. Maybe some of you hadn't thought of it in those terms, but yeah, that's where we are. So this is what I was figuring out as I was digging into the research, and I'm a cool enough guy where I like have conversations with members of Congress and they tell me what's what, you know? Like they'll call me and like, you know, they'll say one thing on cable news and they'll come to me and be like, hey, it's fucking madness. And there's something about my voice or whatnot. It's like people call me to vent. So I figured all of this out last year, and then think, okay, like what's the path forward? So I'm not constitutionally able to do one of two things. I'm not constitutionally able to provide problems and then be like, don't know what to do. And I'm also constitutionally not able to say someone should do it without doing it myself. You know what I mean? It's like if I were to say, hey, here's a path, like I can't be like, and someone should do that because it just feels super lame. Despite the fact that I wrote a book, I don't really see myself as an author so much as like an operator or doer, builder. Like I'm someone who does shit. You know, it's like I hope that you enjoy the book and like I'm proud of it, but like I'm not primarily that. I don't think. So the question is, what's our way out of this mess? Like, what's an actual fix? What can we do in real life? And I've joked a number of times, like I could give a very brilliant, unifying speech, and it would do absolutely nothing. You know, it would be like, you know what I mean? Like that's like, oh, I'll make you feel better for like 5 seconds, and then we'll just go back to hating each other, like in second number 6. So what's the real fix? You're all not going to believe this, Atlanta, but the fix comes from the great state of Alaska. And now, if you've been a supporter of mine for a while, you think I'm going to say like oil, dividend, what's the oil 21st century data, like Alaska, all that stuff? No, I know. How many people know what I'm talking about with it? All right, good. It's good. Didn't just come in off the street. So there's a senator named Lisa Murkowski who's been in the news a great deal recently. And why is that? Someone shout it out.
She voted out against Trump.
She is the only Republican senator who voted to impeach Donald Trump, who is also up for re-election in 2022. Her approval rating among Alaskan Republicans now stands at 6%. They did not like that vote to impeach. So why did she do it? She did it in part because last year Alaska changed their primary system from a closed party primary where she would have had to subject herself to the 20% of most extreme Republicans to open primaries where anyone can vote, decided to be a ranked choice voting. So all of a sudden she can go to the general public in Alaska and say, look, I've been your representative for years, I'm my own person, I have independent judgment, vote me back in. Do you think that had something to do with the fact that she decided to impeach Donald Trump?
Yes.
Yeah, it's rational. It's incentives. If you actually create an incentive where someone can vote their judgment, then they'll do it. If you say to someone, hey, you vote your judgment, you're out of there, then all of a sudden they'll be like, oh, like, you know, I think people are unnecessarily hard on our guy. You know, it's like, we're incentivizing the wrong things. And what Alaska has demonstrated to us is that if you turn the dial and allow someone to actually represent 51% of us instead of 10 to 20% of us, that can change everything. What do you all think, Atlanta? So the plan, the real life plan, is to run around as quickly as possible and unlock as many of our legislators as we can, like Senator Murkowski's gotten unlocked in states around the country. That's a real path forward, and we can do it. I'm happy to say that 24 states around the country actually allow ballot initiatives where if just enough people get together, they can make this change. Now, it's a lot of work because people, you know, like tend to resist change in a lot of these environments, but this is something we can get done. And I hate to say it, but we have about 13 months to get this done. No, truly. We have to go around unlocking, but imagine if we did this in 5 states and you unlocked 10 senators to be able to do what they thought was in the public interest as opposed to just whatever their party leadership dictated. That could be the difference between the survival of our democracy and its demise, truly. The fate of America's democracy rests on us, the people in this room. I know it's heavy. You're like, hey, I'll just go watch this book talk. I don't expect to walk out with like the weight of the world on my shoulders. But too late, you made the decision. You're here, weight placed, because unfortunately there aren't that many people that are going around trying to figure this out or make this case. You know, like I'm making this case now, and I'm like, you know, being cast as some kind of I don't know what, you know, like someone who I don't know what. I actually don't keep up with some of it. But if you look at the first principles, we're in the midst of our founding fathers' worst nightmare come to life, in essence. If you look at the Constitution of the United States, it doesn't say a word about political parties. George Washington, anti-partisan, anti-faction. John Adams, 2 parties would be a great evil upon our country, and it's the exact thing we should try and avoid. 1780. So these were our founding fathers, and if they woke up today, they would look up and say, wow, like this is an awful, awful design. You have a duopoly where you're just gonna clash and get anger and anger at each other. And oh, by the way, it's uniquely subject to authoritarianism. Why? Because if one of the 2 parties gets really terrible leadership, all of a sudden it's in everyone's interest in that party to follow that person. And then if someone decides not to follow that person, they'll be like, look at the other side. You don't like our guy, the other side is worse. And in an environment where 42% of Americans now think their political opponents are evil and their mortal enemies, that will work. We have an incredibly fragile system that could allow authoritarianism to emerge like that 3 years from now, truly. It's the greatest design flaw in history, maybe. When we're looking at it like, how are we allowing this to happen? If you go around the rest of the world, how many political parties does the UK have? You probably don't know, I had to look it up too. Maybe there's a Brit here.
I think it's 8.
The UK has 5, Germany has 7, Sweden has 8, Netherlands has 18. If you have, I know 18 is a little tricky. It's like, I actually asked a Danish person, and he was like, I can't name them all. It's like, who could? But if you had 7 parties, and one of them succumbs to terrible leadership, it's a problem, but it's not an existential problem, you know what I mean? You'll be like, party number 7 has lost its mind. Let's let them sort it out. But it's not like they run everything, you know? They'd have to convince 3 other parties to get on board. Does this sound like a more sane, sustainable, resilient system to you all? Yeah, so this is where we have to run as quickly as possible. We have to try and unlock a critical mass of our legislators to be able to vote their conscience and vote their principle, which we can do in real life next November. And then we have to try to build a genuinely multipolar, multi-party system also as quickly as possible. It turns out that 62% of Americans want an option beyond the major 2 parties. 60% think both parties are out of touch. I've been an independent for 2 whole weeks, and I have to say, I've quite enjoyed it. Really, it's been fun. Someone on the street the other day yelled, "Yo, independent," at me. I was like, that never happened when I was a Democrat. Turns out independents do have more fun. So regardless of whether you love one of the parties or not, and I was a Democrat for 26 years, you have to look at our structure and say, our structure is failing us. Our structure is actually structured to fail. And so this is what I concluded through my research and talking to people and the rest of it, and that's the book you all have in your hands. So the goal now is to try and take this movement, this set of ideas, to as many of our fellow Americans as quickly as possible. Because we only get one shot on goal, really. We had 2022. What do you all think? Are you with me on this?
Yeah.
We didn't ask for it, Atlanta, but it's here for us. The future of our democracy does hinge on whether we can actually get our fellow Americans' heads up. Get their visions not on the us against them dynamic, that frankly they're spending billions of dollars and profiting billions of dollars by getting us inflamed against each other. It's by actually trying to dig into the structural issues that are setting us up to fail, setting us up to turn on each other. Oh, look at that. Now, I'm so grateful to all of you for being here today because this is like the beginnings of a tribe. And one of the great lessons I learned running for president that I try to convey in this book is that all politics are tribal. And we have 2 great tribes. It's not the right design. Again, you'd want there to be at least, I'm gonna say 5. 5 would be the minimum. But when I was running for president, I would go around talking about facts and figures, economics, technology, and AI. And some people would just see this and be like, I don't know, like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do with this. But some people were very, very activated by it. Some people who didn't traditionally like politics were activated by it. Some people who certainly weren't Democrats were activated by it. And what it turns out I had discovered, completely unwittingly, was a new political language. It's like just the language of facts. Oh, that's true. That's true. In some ways, it makes me a really shitty politician. And all the consultants, when they came in initially, were like, Andrew, we gotta get like a moat. You gotta tell stories. You gotta do all this stuff. You gotta do. I was like, oh, I'm so bad at that. It's like I just end up like delivering like the fact message. But you all are among the people that actually respond to facts. What percentage of Americans do you think respond to this political language?
10%.
Unfortunately, it's far less than 51%. I gotta say. We'd be in a different country if 51% loved this language. I'm gonna estimate it's something like 10 to 15% of Americans love this language, this political language of facts. You all, I'm guessing, are among that 10%. I love you for it. And one of the things that I want to suggest to you all is that we don't need 51% to save our country and to win. If we get our tribe of the 10% energized enough, we can do everything I just described and bring us back from the brink. How many senators do you need in the United States right now to control the agenda? One. Two, you know what I mean? Like, if you get 10% and the Foward Party becomes this vibrant third tribe, we're gonna get a senator. We might get that senator in 2022. Like, seriously, like I'm talking to someone who resembles this, several someones. So that is the vision. That's the movement. To take this country we love in a better direction, not left or right, but forward, and that's where I hope you will lead us, Atlanta. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Atlanta. So fun. I feel like an encore.
Let's change the fucking incentives.
Yeah, that's fine. Let's change the fucking incentives. It's a reasonable summary. That should be the Foward Party's mantra. We're working on different mantras. I've got them all. Let's change the fucking incentives. Could be the winner though. So, would love to take questions from you all. In the Foward hoodie, I can't resist. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I'm here to represent, right? So my wife is videotaping. Okay, great. So you have said the four W's really, who, what, where. Now the how part is my question. Right? So as a statement, it does not make sense to utilize the institutions that the duopoly built to make this happen. So how are we, as the 10%, would be able to extend? For example, there's some folks out there that's built their media just for this purpose alone. Nerds for Humanity, right? Tom?
Yeah, I love Tom.
Yeah, he did of the people.us. Are you going to utilize those things outside of the duopoly's institutions to kind of push that agenda?
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for the question. I hope you all heard it. It's like, how do you push this agenda with institutions that are outside of the duopoly? So we're going to be very smart and practical. One of the things that we've said is the folks we support as candidates, they'll probably be running as Democrats or Republicans because that's just the practical thing to do. We don't advise that people necessarily change your party registration because that might make you less influential, not more. On the media side, the goal is to try and build up an independent constellation of media sources. I'd be curious, like, where do you all turn for your news? I'm going to shout something out.
Breaking point.
Breaking points.
A lot of Crystal and Sagar fans.
Yes.
I almost ran a poll the other day, Crystal or Sagar. I was just going to screw around. I'm going to do that. They're both friends, so I'm going to do that. But this really answers the question that's being posed: is like, how do we get the message out? And the fact is, right now, you know, I obviously will go on CNN or cable news anytime they ask me because that helps me reach people. But we need to have an independent means of reaching people. And I do think that some of the podcasts and breaking points and independent voices can be the future and certainly can be the voice of this movement, of Foward. It's one reason why I'll be investing more in my own content to try and get the word out there. It's fun. This past time I thought to myself, I read this book and I was like, okay, what do you need to do to fix this? You need to start a third party that changes everything to open primaries and ranked choice voting, thus giving rise to like a multipolar system, and you need an independent media arm. And so I was like, okay, I'll build those two things. So that's the plan. Yes, Miss.
Yeah. Who in Georgia should we work with?
So the question is, who in Georgia should we work with?
And that's to open the primary.
Better ballot Georgia.
Better ballot Georgia. That's what I love. So one of the joys of each of these environments is that there are people who are trying to modernize our voting in various environments here in Georgia. Better ballot Georgia and other environments, it's a fair vote. So the big message we have to take to people is that this process change will just yield us better results and better policy. And a lot of people right now have still never heard of ranked choice voting, and so it tends to concern them. But if you walk them through, here's an example that I'd like to use that might help people, is that if the Republican Party had used ranked choice voting in its primary in 2016, Trump probably does not win. Because he's getting 35 to 40% of the votes, and then the other 7 candidates are divvying up the other 65%, and so it looks like he's crushing. but he wasn't getting 51% support because there weren't a lot of ballots out there that were like, Jeb Bush won, Donald Trump too. You know, it's not like a real, it was like kind of all or nothing. And so ranked choice voting can help reward the reasonable, the coalition builders, and diminish the extremes. And so Better Ballot Georgia is working on that. It sounds like here, in other organizations, it is Fair Vote. But all of the things I'm describing in terms of the way our elections are run are all controlled at the state level. Again, there's nothing in the Constitution about it, so it's all just statewide. That's one reason why there are these ballot initiatives that allow you to change it at the state. And the states that don't have a ballot initiative, it's the state legislators. So the state legislators could look up and say, hey, let's change the process. That strikes me as something of a more difficult lift than having a bunch of animated citizens, but it is doable, it is conceivable. There have been legislatures that have locally adopted ranked choice voting, and any state could make this change. You know what's interesting is here in Georgia, it'd be fascinating because you all are very, very purple now, but the party that should be for this in a lot of the blue and red states is just whatever party's out of power. You know what I mean? Because they look up and be like, hey, like I don't have any voice, no one cares what I think, so when you make this open primary, then maybe like we'll get different points of view to emerge. Thank you so much for the question. Better Ballot Georgia, love it. I don't want to stray geographically. Sir, with the handsome facial hair.
So I'm really interested in the concept of like a lot of our institutions, media, politicians, like not being able to like admit fault basically, and how that causes a lot of things not being able to move forward. I would love to know, kind of in the spirit of whether it's humility, taking responsibility, being able to admit fault. I would love to know, like, what is one thing that you think that you either got wrong or could have done better during your presidential run or in the past few years? Just kind of as a, in the spirit of trying to solve problems by admitting that things are either broken or not aligned correctly.
I feel for people who are in this boat because if you do admit fault, then everyone just piles on you. And I'm going to use Joe Biden as an example in Afghanistan. So Joe Biden, the pullout, like a lot of people were like, hey, you know, someone bought something. I mean, clearly, like this isn't the plan. And if Joe Biden was like, that was not great, like things actually get worse for him in the media for like the next day. And so then his game plan and his team, I'm sure, telling him this is like, hey, just be like, this was the plan, everyone agreed to the plan was great. And so that's where like the media incentives then go. And then a couple weeks later, his generals were like, yeah, that wasn't the plan, and we didn't like the plan. And then it's like, you know, it's like, yeah, move on. You know, so right now, like if someone acts like a human being and expresses what you're describing, like humility or whatnot, then it's actually worse for them in this environment. And so their team tells them just to like button it up. Which is why I have never done anything wrong in any way. I mean, in real life, yeah, I mean, there are tons of things that like, you know, I would like to revisit on my campaigns. A lot of them have to do with various people and personnel that, frankly, like no one ever, you know, knows about on the outside. But you know, it's like in these environments, if you have the wrong person in a particular position, then you know it's like you find out in real time. You're like, oh no, and that was deeply painful for me because I prided myself when I was the CEO of something where I was very diligent on hiring and culture building and the rest of it. And then when that doesn't go perfectly on a campaign, it just blows up in real time. You're like, oh shoot, and then you look up. And again, like the incentive again is to be like, well, like let's just try and like make this like, you know, last one news cycle instead of two, or whatever the heck the thing is. It's so that's something. When I think about the missteps, I think about it in those terms. Wow, this has become such a confessional. Andrew Yang breaks down in tears. This.
What are your thoughts on cryptocurrency adoption and regulation?
So the questions about cryptocurrency adoption and regulation. I have a lot of friends in the cryptocurrency community, and the friends I have that are know, like that are kind of long-standing professionals think that some degree of regulation and taxation is inevitable and appropriate and necessary, but they don't want the industry to get unfairly treated or penalized or have certain institutions be held to standards that aren't reasonable, that's going to quash innovation. So that's where I am. I think that some reasonable regulation and taxation is, again, reasonable and overdue. But if you look at the way that it's going to get treated, just like everything else in America, it's going to get politicized. Like someone's going to be like, ooh, like there's a guy, Brad Sherman, who's like, crypto is the worst thing in the world. And it's like, you know why Brad feels that way? Because there are like some banks in his ear being like, crypto's the worst thing in the world. Crypto's the worst thing in the world. He's like, yeah, I got it. So that's not what you want. The Foward Party is going to be de facto very pro-crypto because we're for just like reasonable integration. And the fact is the blockchain and the associated technologies and Ether and the rest of it, they have profound potential to improve the human condition. Oh, they do. It's like you could design things that like are incredible. I mean, you could have UBI, in real life very quickly, smart money, like different forms of currency that reward volunteering and like, pro-social behaviors. Like a lot of stuff, like if you imagine utopia, like the mechanics of cryptocurrency are actually a big part of it. So what you don't want to do, like I had a tweet the other day, was like, if you have $1 trillion industry, it's going to create a lot of jobs and it could define the future, like don't screw it up. It's like pretty common sense, but unfortunately there's some legislators, and a lot of it is our legislators just don't understand any of this stuff anyway. You know what I mean? Like they're and one of the things I've taken, and I feel a little bit jerky for talking about it, but I'll talk about it, whatever. A lot of us are thinking about it. Like our leaders are just really old. You know what I mean? I mean, like this stuff's getting a little bit ridiculous. So like the average House member is 58.4, average senator 64.3. And you're like, oh, it's not so bad. But then like the leadership's like 81, 80, been there for decades. The combined age of our presidential candidates this past cycle was 150. And if you run it back again, which we probably will, it will be 158. Like it's really looking up being like at some point someone has to say something and be like, I don't know, like literally when you look at these situations, you're like the main variable is health. It's like, is this person gonna run? It's like, well, it depends on their feeling, I mean, it's like, it's not a really intelligent system. It's actually like in some ways like the embodiment of a system that just can't renew itself. Like it's become so sclerotic and institutionalized, you know what I mean? Like, one of the things I joke about this, it's like, I'm for term limits for members of Congress, like long term, it's 18 years, not like ridiculous, but like 18 years in each house, 36 years total. I mean, that's a long time. But one of the things that I joke about is like, I want to like make a commitment being like, hey, Andrew Yang pledges to retire from any kind of public life at like a certain age, because like I'll want to get out of the way, presumably, like there'll be like some next gen me, I'll be like, take it, please. Maybe it's because I'm not terribly animated by some of the things that seem to motivate some others. That's fun. I'm really enjoying this conversation. How did my new material go? You don't even know which of it's new. It's fine. It's fine, it's good. Miss?
You said that you speak in a factual language. Are you ever concerned that the consequences of that are that you're alienating voters that do vote from an emotional standpoint, or that they'll feel condescended to?
So the question is, do I worry that my factual language is alienating to some, or maybe even condescending or off-putting? It's something that I've weighed and navigated somewhat as I've transitioned from, frankly, Democrat to independent, honestly. And I felt myself to be like pretty democratic, I mean, I freaking registered in the 90s, and it was only through this last period of time where like people would just be like, oh, you're like a fake Democrat, you're a fake Democrat. And I'd be like, really? Like I thought I was a real Democrat. Like, where is this coming from? And then now, at long last, I'm a little bit like, oh, maybe I was a fake Democrat. So to the extent that there are some people that this approach isn't a perfect fit for, there is part of me that actually like feels bad about it, because I feel like I share a lot of common goals with a lot of people who, let's say, are using a different political language. I have a very similar vision to some other folks. I do think one of the issues that we're having now is that we are just using language as the proxy. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, you use this language, I like it. If you don't use this language, I don't like it. And that's true on both sides. If you go to Republicans and say, hey, drug companies, they're the worst, right? They'd be like, yeah, hate them. It's like, yeah, lower prices, negotiate. What do you think? Yeah. Let's socialize medicine. They're like, no, hate it. It's like it just depends on what coded language you use. And so I certainly feel hopeful that people who are perceptive and attentive will see that I'm after some very big picture goals. I can just hope for the best on that side. But I do also think that leaning into what I would do naturally is the best way for us to form a tribe that can actually help change the course of national history. But thank you for the question. All right, one more though. These questions have been awesome. I think he's been actually filming me, which makes me grateful. So, plus he's got a Yang shirt on, so I know. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so the open primary thing, set of ideas you have, I get a lot of pushback from my circle about how it could be dangerous because of infecting a certain party, voting a certain way with evil or bad for that particular party interest. But at the same time, I rebuttal with them saying that, our parties are already infected. The Democratic Party, for example, which, by the way, Democrats, okay. I feel like our Democratic Party is pretty infected with a lot of actual communists who don't believe in capitalism at all, and they get all the lights.
I thought you were going another direction there.
And then
I thought the infection was Big Pharma or something. Continue.
And then on the right, a very similar thing, going on, where you got very, very polarizing, on both, 100%. And if we got rid of those other parties, the Communist Party's gone in history because of how evil we painted what communism is, for example. And so they're like, oh, I'm not part of the Communist Party. No, not me, I'm a Democrat. And then they kind of hide themselves, and then they paint the whole party bad because they have these set of ideas that are pushing towards that process. And it's like, that's just an example, obviously. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the vision we have to try and pursue, to your question, when people talk about hey, the party is going to be influenced in some way, is that we just need more points of view expressed in American political life, and trying to put them into two big buckets is making less and less sense. It really does not make much sense. If you think about how many political tribes you can identify just off the top of your head, you come up with at least 5. And so if you were to say, look, let's if those each had their own party, we'd be in much better shape for multiple reasons. So that's the argument I would present to people. It's look, where do we need to go? We just need more than 2 parties. We need more than 2 poles that, by the way, are just going to end up smashing each other to oblivion, not getting anything done, drive us to civil war. So open primaries are a step in that direction. 62% of Americans want an alternative. You know what I mean? What are we doing? It's this creaking duopoly just kind of lurching forward, and everyone's like, oh, I guess this is what we're doing. Okay. And then someone comes to change and be like, hey, maybe we should listen to the 62% of people who want something different. And be like, oh, no, infection. Or whatever the answer. It's this stuff is so overdue. It's incredible. Again, we're in this accidental, crazy design, and it's going to ruin us. And the wild thing is that there are so few actors in American life who just raise their hands and be like, hey, this is just a really massive design problem, and we should just fix that. One of the things I have loved about my 2 weeks as an independent is I have discovered people who have already been doing this work for a number of years, and they are the most lovely, selfless, lucid, patriotic people. There's no territoriality to them at all. It's I raise my hand and I'm like, hey, forward party, third party, open primaries, and everyone's like, come on in, A lot of them are actually expressing to me that they're grateful that someone's going to champion ranked choice voting and open primaries in this way. And they're like, oh, thank goodness you're coming this direction. So it's a really good feeling. I feel like my role in American life is to mainstream an important idea whose time has come. We have done it with universal basic income, and now we're going to do with the fact that the duopoly needs an upgrade. And you're going to do it with me?
Yeah!
Thank you, Atlanta. I love you all. And I can't wait to meet you all individually, take some pictures, and sign some books. Thank you. Let's move this country forward.
Give it up one more time for Andrew Yang, everybody. Isn't it nice to hear some real talk? Isn't it nice? Thank you guys so much for being here. We're gonna do photos in the entrance, so give us just a little bit of time to get him up front, and then we will take pictures and do book signings with all of you. There's a staff of 4 of us that will be helping you out. We're gonna take your phone, take the picture for you. You don't even have to think about it. So we got you guys, we got you. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great day.